The 6th International Conference in support of the Palestinian Intifada, or uprising, has been held in Iran's capital, Tehran, with delegates from 80 countries in attendance. This is an event which showcases Iran's solidarity with the Palestinians. In this edition of the debate, we'll discuss the challenges facing Palestinians and what solutions there exist for Palestinian rights to be recognized.
The leader of Iran's Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, says those powers that created the Zionist regime in the Middle East are trying to boost it through seeking divisions among Islamic countries.
منطقه ما که همواره پشتیبان ملت فلسطین در مبارزات آن علیه یک توطئه جهانی بوده است، این روزها دستخوش ناآرامی و بحران‌های متعدد است. بحران‌های موجود در چندین کشور اسلامی منطقه موجب شده است تا حمایت از مسئله فلسطین و آرمان مقدس آزادی قدس کمرنگ شود. توجه به نتیجه این بحران‌ها به ما تفهیم می‌کند که قدرت‌های سودبرنده از آن کدامند. آنانی که رژیم صهیونیستی را در این منطقه به وجود آوردند تا از طریق تحمیل یک درگیری طولانی مدت مانع از ثبات و استقرار و پیشرفت منطقه شوند، اینک نیز در پس فتنه‌های موجود قرار دارند.
Ayatollah Khamenei made the remarks in an address to the 6th International Conference in support of the Palestinian Intifada in Tehran. Iran's leader referred to the creation of Israel as one of the dirty chapters of history that will be closed with God's will. He went on to say the fake entity of Israel was created by bringing in Jews from other parts of the world to replace the real entity of Palestine. The leader went on to praise those who are doing their utmost to prevent the domination of the Zionist regime in the entire region. This year's conference on Palestine comes as Palestinians are facing a new challenge with the Trump administration, who's vowed to boost support for Israel to new heights. U.S. President Donald Trump has recently indicated that a two-state solution is dead and that Washington is ready to settle for one state. He's even offered to relocate the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, Al-Quds, which Palestinians want as the capital of the future state.
The Zionist regime is a tiny regime that is surrounded by a majority of Arabs and Muslims. So that's why the attempt of the United States was to redraw the geopolitical map of the region according to sectarian confessional lines by stirring up conflicts between various sects in the region and various ethnicities. It's a way to divert the attention from the main struggle, from the main cause, which is Palestine.
Many believe that the U.S. never intended to support a two-state solution in the first place, and the so-called peace talks held over the past decades were only meant to give Israel time to grab more Palestinian land before revealing the true nature of their plot. Over the past decades, Israel has constructed enough settlements to cut off the West Bank. Now it's revealed a new plan that will see hundreds of Palestinians living in some 300 acres of land forcefully evacuated from their homes for a settlement road that cuts through East and West Jerusalem to be constructed. The road will eventually be connecting illegal Israeli settlements north, south, and east of the city. Many believe that Israel's recent law on legalizing settler units shows Tel Aviv's disregard of international law that's left Palestinians with no other choice but to continue with their resistance against the occupation of their land.
Our guest joining us in this edition of the debate, Director of the Shafakna Institute for Middle Eastern Studies, Catherine Shagdam, joins us in the studios here in the capital, Tehran. We also have journalist and political commentator Maxine Dover, who joins us from New York. I'd like to welcome you both, and if I can first start with you, Maxine Dover. This is a very large gathering that's taking place here in Iran's capital, Tehran, and this is obviously to show Iran's solidarity, along with 80 participants of 80 countries, which amounts to, I should say, over 200 participants. And Iran's leader, one of the statements that he has said is that those powers that created the Zionist regime in the Middle East are trying to boost it through seeking divisions among Islamic countries. Do you agree with that? Hasn't there been evidence of these divisions that have been one of the highlights of the categories of this area that has pretty much come into crisis mode now for the past years?
Well, I must say I don't agree with that. I think divisions are what have existed, and with efforts towards developing a regional concept, those divisions will be far less angry, far less dictatorial of what can be developed in the region. By looking at a regional development concept, we are able to look towards a much more positive future for everyone in the region.
Okay, Catherine Shugdam, do you think that there is an issue when it comes to this sectarianism that is gripping the region? We heard one of the comments made there by one of the analysts in the report that I thought was interesting, that Western nations want to redraw the map based on ethnicity to distract from the main issue, Palestine.
Oh, definitely. I mean, this is an agenda that has been pushed for decades now. I mean, the very creation of Israel, was based on that agenda, that what they're trying to do, what imperial powers are trying to do, is basically remake the Middle East to their own vision and to play along ethnic and sectarian lines so that they would force people to basically live in division and against one another. And while doing this, of course, they would not be fighting imperialism. And this is essentially what has happened in the Middle East. If you just look, it's not just what's happening in Israel and Israel versus Palestine. If you look at the way that the entire, I would say, war narrative has been set up across the Middle East, you look at Syria, you look at Iraq, you look at Bahrain, you look at Yemen, and time again, we are being told, that, certain religious community cannot live with one another, but that's simply not true. We need to remember that the reason why now religious communities have an issue with one another, it is because, certain powers, and I'm referring to essentially to the US and the Saudi, have actually worked to create and engineer those tensions, by pushing money and promoting certain agendas and ideologies such as Wahhabism or Zionism, that created those tensions. Those things did not exist, and to actually argue that they did is going against history. If you look at the history of the Middle East, I'm not saying there was never been tension, but not religious tension, not to the extent that we see today. And this has risen because of the rise of Wahhabism and Zionism, which essentially function exactly, they are very similar in the way that they function, their structure, and what they promote, which is exclusionism. They live against other people. And Israel has continued on and on and on to say that, they're facing an existential threat, that, all those Islamic countries surrounding it want to annihilate it. That's simply not true. What is actually happening is that Israel is annihilating Palestine, not the other way around. Palestine is fighting for survival. They're fighting for their identity and their tradition to be actually recognized. They're fighting for their name. They're fighting for their history and their national sovereignty to be actually recognized. And this is something that Israel is denying, while at the same time claiming it for itself, which is absolute insanity as far as I'm concerned.
Maxime Dover, you heard Catherine Shugdam, many areas that she covered. First, your reaction.
Well, fantasy would be to deny Israel's history. Israel has a history of thousands of years in the land in which the modern Jewish state is sitting. Jerusalem is written about not only in the Jewish Bible, but in the records of all of the peoples who have history, indigenous history in the region, including the Jewish people who have an indigenous history in the region. The archaeological evidence is very clear. The archaeological evidence in Jerusalem is just as clear as the pyramids are in Egypt. There is no denying that there is a Jewish history in this land area, that there was no existing geopolitical state for the period between the Romans and 1948 is a matter of politics and war, and it has now been corrected to allow the Jewish people to return to their historical land. Vis-a-vis the Palestinian situation, I am one who believes very adamantly in the two-state solution. I would very much like to see those who have the history of and the future of the Palestinian people as their real concern have a landmass, a Palestinian state. just as much as I would like to see the Jewish state continue to grow in the land that is their heritage. There is a need to develop a peaceful situation, not to threaten any people in the area, and to allow the growth and the future development for all of the people in the region, not only the Palestinians, not only the Israelis, but the Syrians and the Kurds, and each of the people who you denigrate as wanting their ethnic or historical separation. These are real people. These are real people with real history, and the fact that the British made lines that were convenient for an oil company doesn't mean that it should be the dictate of all future.
Well, a landmass, Catherine Shagdam, as we're well aware, and I'm sure the world is well aware of, is that shrinking landmass for Palestinians that we see of the sliver called occupied Palestine, and we see where that has gone in favor of what entity. And that is what's been happening for the past decades. Do you think that there is a concerted plan when it comes to not resolving the issue of Palestine in order for Israel to execute what it has done, which has been all in favor of the one administration after another throughout the decades?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think that the Americans are dragging their feet, and not just the American, actually. It's the entire international community. But if I can quickly go back to your guest's argument, arguing religion and the right of return is actually a non-argument, because I mean, the Palestinian could argue the same thing. And if you go about saying that people have a right to their religion, and that because of their religion and because of their history, then they have a right to a state, I'm sorry to say, but you're actually playing directly into the line of Wahhabism and actually legitimizing, the Daesh and the Islamic State, because this is what they're calling for. So you need to be very careful when you toe the line of the right of return, because then you could ask the Vikings to come back, or you could ask, Native Indians to actually reclaim their land in America. I'm not quite sure that Washington, D.C. would be quite pleased with that idea. So, be careful when you play history, when you play ethnicity and religion, because it could be played against you. And the Palestinians have a right, and the Palestinian, last time I checked, were in Palestine long before anyone else as well, because they are part of this history. And do not confuse ethnicity, do not confuse nationality with religion. Remember that there are Palestinians who happen to be Jewish, that some of them happen to be Christian, and some of them happen to be Muslim. So be careful to not blur those lines and actually depict and actually play directly into the line of Daesh, saying that it's okay to have an Islamic state, and that's terrorism. So what is it so different about having a Jewish state and not call it terrorism? Because again, this is playing into exceptionism. And yes, Palestine has been systematically disappeared. Yes, Palestine has been engineered for disappearance because it pleases the Israeli and the Zionist agenda. This is the reality. You can't play, semantic anymore. You can't play into the narrative, of victimhood and say that everybody wants to annihilate the Jews. That's simply not true. Again, you're confusing Judaism and Zionism. Those two are not the same thing. You can't claim a political construct which is based on fascism and call it religious. It's not religious. You would actually have Jews who would disagree with you and say that Zionism is actually anti-Judaic and that it's actually standing against their very faith. So be careful, again, when you use those narratives and those arguments, because they don't work anymore. People are awake and they can see. Zionism is a political construct that actually seeks to ethnic cleanse the Palestinian because they're there and because you want to have this land for yourself, and they're claiming some kind of a religious, superiority over it. Why should Judaism claim, Palestine? Why can't you just admit that Judaism has a right to exist just as much as others have the right to exist, and that religious freedom is actually an inherent human right, and that you can't claim to have ownership over anything?
Very well. I know you have a response, Maxine Dover, but hold on to your thoughts. Let's take a quick listen to some of the viewer comments as posted on the Facebook page, and we'll get right back to the debate.
Thanks for organizing this conference. We need more of these now more than ever. I hope the Arab monarchies in the region follow and organize such conferences and stop normalizing relations with occupiers of Palestine. Many of my illusions about Iran clear, the only nation which refuses to bow down to the Zionist global lobby. Palestinians must be supported in their struggle till victory, inshallah. All Muslim nations should rise to support Palestine like Iran. Hats off to Iran. Alhamdulillah, they have the courage to do it. Iran is a courageous country to help the Palestinian people when most other nations fear the Zionist Israel via the U.S.
Some of the viewer comments there, of which I'd like to get some reactions. With Maxine Dover, before the break, if you have a reaction to what Catherine Shagdam said.
Let's go back to the concept of the history that my colleague is stressing, that there were connections that exist between the Palestinians and this land area. There are certainly connections that exist between the Israelis and this land area. Now, I am an American. I am Jewish, but I am an American who looks at this geopolitical situation from the point of view of history as well as politics, as well as future. It is to the interest of all in the region to create a peaceful situation that allows the development of each people's future. I am repeating what is the thought of earlier, and that if Iran truly wanted to help the Palestinian people, they would recognize the history of both peoples and create not rocket tunnels, but schools and sewer tunnels that would bring fresh water. Israel at this point is supplying the water and the electricity for Gaza. Why will not these monies being spent on rockets only to injure people rather be spent to develop Gaza, to develop the factories, to develop the jobs, to develop a true presence for the Palestinian people? Not
Okay,
just
let's get a response to that.
An armed fortress.
Very well. Catherine Shagdam, go ahead.
Now, is this a joke? I mean, seriously? I mean, you're talking as if the Palestinians are not under occupation. You're talking as if, you know, the Israelis are so very kind to actually provide water and medicine and food for them. Do you realize that you're actually describing a situation of siege? And that for decades now, you know, the Palestinians have been under occupation. They have been denied their rights just because Israel can. And you're actually asking why the people don't want to resist. Do you realize that if any other nations in the world were under occupation, they would resist? It's actually a natural right. People do resist oppression. They do resist against, you know, foreign invaders because this is their right. You cannot actually expect someone to show up at your doorstep and come into your house and tell you what to do. You would seriously expect to just say thank you and bend over and say please some more? I don't think so. The Palestinians have a right to their land. They have a right to their nationality. They have a right to their history. They have a right to their tradition. The problem is what Israel is asking of the Palestinians is to actually disappear and deny the fact that they exist so that they could rise higher. It's not going to happen. They are there and they're going here to stay. You can't disappear a people or deny that history happened. What you're trying to do is to always to manipulate the situation, to manipulate the narrative, and again claim victimhood, saying that all tunnel is being made. But are you actually recalling the horrors and the massacre that Israel time and time again is actually conducting against the Palestinian people? Are we talking about this? What do you expect them to do? They're fighting because they have no other choice. They're fighting for survival. You know, you're crying, no, I'm not finished. You're crying over rockets, man-made rockets. What is it that you're throwing at Gaza? What is it that you're throwing at Palestinians? You are massacring an entire people and you expect them to look at you and do nothing?
Do you have numbers for these so-called massacres? It's like the
Are you serious?
Have you
watched the last attack that Israel conducted against Gaza and you want to talk numbers to me? Have you watched the mainstream? Have you watched what's coming out of Israel? Are you seriously talking about...
Massacre implies a rather significant number. I am not at all denying what you said, but I will point out to you that exactly what you said could be changed, and you could be using the word Israeli instead of Palestinian, and the desire would remain the same.
Do not compare.
There is, on the contrary, there is an absolute ability to create two states so that there is no denial of either people's history, so that there is an ability to build towards a future.
You say this, but you don't do it.
Rockets. We could build refrigerators. We could build refrigerators instead of rockets. Israel is not building rockets except in response to the rockets that are thrown at it. And the idea of nuclear weapons has never been really confirmed.
No, of course not.
And if it exists, it certainly is not an offensive weapon.
It's a myth. We all know that.
It's not an offensive weapon. I am not commenting either
Okay.
whether it's a myth or not a myth. The point is to create real existing states and not have the President Abbas simply walk away from negotiations that went on for 3 years and offer the Palestinian people 98% of what was being asked.
Maybe we should create safe zones in Israel.
What
That
was
would be a good
being
idea.
asked, and there was room. I didn't hear your comment.
No, I'm saying maybe we should create
Maybe you
safe
should
zones.
create what?
We should create safe zones in Israel. I think Donald Trump is quite keen on safe zones lately. I think it could be a good idea.
Well, we should create safe zones, and those safe zones could be called a state. They could be called a state of Palestine and a state of Israel.
I'm gonna ask this last
And
question
that
from
would
you.
be a
I'm sorry,
very
Maxine Dover.
fine way of being safe.
Maxine Dover, let me come in here because we are quickly running out of time. And I'm going to give you, Catherine Shagdam, 30 seconds. The occupied territories, you know, stone throwing has actually landed Palestinian youth in jail. They received varied sentences, some 1 year, some few years. You just had a sentence handed down to an Israeli soldier that killed a Palestinian execution style, but he was only given 18 months. Is that the kind of law and injustice? It's actually a reflection of the injustice that Palestinians receive. Where do you see the Palestinian Intifada going at this point? We started back in September 2016, and at this point is continuing. A couple hundred Palestinians have died at this point.
Well, at this moment in time, I mean, the Palestinians are facing, you know, a war when it comes to Israel. There is no justice coming out of Israel. The entire system, you know, Zionism is actually based on exceptionalism, and they think themselves better. They think themselves, you know, above the law. And of course, when they kill, it's righteous. And when Palestinians defend themselves and actually exercise the natural right to resist against oppression, then it's being called unfair, and it's being called murder, and it's being called many, many things. You can't expect the Palestinians have no other choice but to resist. I mean, resistance at this stage in Palestine has become a national right, and you know there is no other way for them to exist, because you know the alternative, as Ayatollah Khamenei mentioned today at the conference, was that it's complete disappearance and it's actually ethnic cleansing. You can't expect the Palestinians to not resist. So moving forward, you know, they're going to do what they have been doing for the past decades, which is to resist against oppression, and they're going to continue to push forward. But the thing is, they're actually becoming stronger, because a people who is born in resistance is a very powerful people.
I got to jump in. Unfortunately, we're fresh out of time. I do apologize. Director of the Shafakna Institute for Middle Eastern Studies, Catherine Shagdam, thank you for your comments. And journalist and political commentator Maxine Dover, thank you from New York with her comments. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of The Debate. From Mikava Tavway and the entire team in the capital, Tehran. It's goodbye.